Tonight's story is not just about a refinery fire in Bahrain, and it is not just about a leadership change inside Iran. It is about how two developments, happening at nearly the same time, may be shaping the next phase of this conflict. On one side, Bahrain's state energy company Bapco declared force majeure after Iranian strikes targeted energy installations in the country. On the other, Iran's political and military establishment rallied behind Mojtaba Khamenei after the killing of his father, Ali Khamenei. Put those two developments together and you get a picture of a war that is not slowing down, not simplifying, and not becoming easier for the region to contain. The first part matters because energy infrastructure is never just energy infrastructure in a conflict like this. A refinery is not only a physical site. It is fuel, transport, industrial activity, government revenue, and public confidence all at once. When a refinery or associated installations are hit, the signal is larger than the blast zone. It tells governments, markets, and populations that the war can reach the systems that keep daily life functioning. The second part matters because succession in Iran was always going to be one of the biggest unknowns in any major crisis. But what has now happened is not a vacuum. It is the opposite. Instead of visible confusion, senior Iranian institutions appear to be moving fast toward continuity. Mojtaba Khamenei's elevation and the open rallying of powerful factions behind him suggests that Iran's leadership wanted to project one message above all others. The chain of command still exists, the state still functions, and pressure from outside is not going to produce collapse on demand. That combination is what makes this moment so important. An external pressure campaign aimed at weakening Iran is colliding with an internal response built around consolidation, discipline, and symbolic continuity. And if that pattern holds, then the conflict may become even more dangerous, precisely because both sides can point to recent events as proof that they must keep going. Let's start with the Bahrain side of the story. Bapco's declaration of force majeure is a serious development because that phrase has real-world meaning beyond legal language. It signals that operations or deliveries have been disrupted by events outside normal control. In practical terms, it tells customers, traders, insurers, and governments that normal commitments may no longer be met on normal timelines. Even if domestic supply is partly secured, and even if the full scale of damage turns out to be limited compared with worst fears, the declaration itself is a sign that the conflict has crossed into territory, where energy reliability is now part of the war. That matters, because Gulf energy systems are not just local assets. They sit inside a wider network that affects shipping, refining, electricity generation, industrial planning, and price expectations far beyond the immediate battlefield. Once markets start thinking in terms of vulnerability rather than stability, the economic consequences can widen faster, and that is why the Bahrain strike cannot be viewed in isolation. In recent days, multiple reports have described Iranian attacks or attempted attacks on regional energy-related targets, while traffic through key regional routes has also come under stress. The broader effect is not just destruction, it is uncertainty. Uncertainty about supply, uncertainty about escalation, uncertainty about whether the conflict is still bounded or whether it is entering a phase where regional infrastructure becomes a routine target. For Bahrain, this is especially sensitive. The country is small, strategically exposed, deeply tied to Gulf energy flows, and host to major security relationships. A hit on energy installations there carries symbolic weight. It also creates pressure on neighboring governments. If one state's energy backbone can be disrupted, others must ask how exposed their own systems are and how much insurance, defense, and redundancy they really have. Now shift to Tehran. The appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader after the killing of Ali Khamenei is historically significant for several reasons. First, it is a major transfer of authority during wartime. Second, it appears to reinforce hardline continuity rather than any visible move toward moderation or fragmentation. Third, it brings back an old Iranian political taboo, the fear that a republic born in opposition to monarchy could begin to look dynastic. That last point is especially important. For years, discussion around Mojtaba Khamenei carried an unusual tension. He was seen as influential, connected, and close to powerful institutions, especially conservative networks and the Revolutionary Guard. But formal succession to the top post was always controversial because hereditary optics are deeply awkward in a political system that defines itself through the rejection of royal rule. So if this step has now been taken, especially under wartime conditions, it suggests that the leadership weighed legitimacy concerns against survival concerns and chose survival, continuity, and command cohesion first. That does not mean the move will be universally accepted inside Iran. It almost certainly will not be. But in the short term, it may do something else that outside pressure campaigns often underestimate. It may strengthen elite alignment rather than break it. This is where a lot of outside analysis historically goes wrong. There is often an assumption that if enough pain is applied, the state will crack, the public will revolt, and the leadership will lose control. But history does not always work that way. Strategic bombing and infrastructure attacks do not reliably produce political surrender. In many cases, they produce a rally around the flag effect, where anger at the attacker temporarily outweighs internal divisions. And that possibility matters here because reports from inside Iran describe attacks on fuel depots and petroleum logistics sites that have caused severe environmental and public health consequences. Thick smoke over Tehran, contaminated air, acid rain concerns, rationing pressure, and visible disruption to civilian life all create real hardship. But hardship is not the same thing as political collapse. In fact, when people believe their country is under broad external assault, pressure can harden identity and deepen support for continuity, even among people who are otherwise critical of their government. That may help explain why military and political leaders are rallying behind Mojtaba now. In moments like this, institutions often prioritize coherence over debate. The IRGC in particular has long been one of the most important power centers in Iran, and its alignment behind a successor is more than ceremonial. It signals to rivals, to the bureaucracy, to external adversaries, and to the population that the core coercive and organizational machinery of the state still recognizes a single center of legitimacy. If you're sitting in Tehran and trying to prevent fragmentation, that is the result you want. You want rapid public allegiance. You want the assembly of experts to appear decisive. You want senior officials speaking with one voice. You want the succession to look less like uncertainty and more like inevitability. And if you are sitting in Washington, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Doha, or Manama, that is not a trivial development, because it suggests that decapitation at the top did not automatically produce disarray. Instead, it may have accelerated centralization around a figure already embedded in the system. In the near term, his emergence appears to strengthen the argument that the Iranian system intends to endure the war, not reset itself because of it. Another key question is whether infrastructure strikes like the one affecting Bapco can force regional governments to push harder for de-escalation. Possibly, yes, but not necessarily in a simple or unified way. Some governments may push harder behind the scenes to contain the conflict. Others may double down on defense partnerships. Some may increase public condemnation while quietly preparing for a longer confrontation. Energy disruption raises pressure, but pressure does not automatically produce peace. Sometimes it produces more urgent diplomacy. Sometimes it produces harder lines. That uncertainty is exactly why this moment feels so unstable. You have a wartime succession in one of the region's most consequential states. You have markets reacting, governments recalculating, and populations trying to understand whether these are isolated events or signs of a more dangerous phase. And the answer, at least for now, is that they look less like isolated events and more like connected signals. A connected signal that leadership decapitation did not end Iranian command. A connected signal that regional energy systems are now being drawn deeper into the conflict. A connected signal that symbolic targets and strategic infrastructure are becoming part of the same battlefield. And a connected signal that the next stage of this war may depend not only on military capability, but on which side can better sustain political cohesion under pressure. That may end up being the biggest takeaway of all. For years, many analysts assumed that if Iran ever faced simultaneous leadership shock and severe infrastructure pressure, the result could be fragmentation. But what we may be watching instead is a state trying to convert shock into consolidation. Mojtaba Khamenei's succession, whatever criticisms or controversy surround it, is being presented internally as continuity. The rallying of military and political leaders behind him reinforces that presentation, and strikes reaching Gulf energy assets show that Tehran, or forces aligned with its strategy, still see value in widening the cost map of the conflict. Whether that strategy succeeds is a separate question. It may backfire. It may deepen regional opposition. It may intensify military retaliation. It may invite more coordinated countermeasures. But it clearly aims to show that Iran can still shape events even after losing the most important figure in its political system. That is why the Bahrain refinery story and the Mojtaba succession story belong together. One is about external leverage. The other is about internal continuity. One is about what can be disrupted. The other is about what can be preserved. One says the region's infrastructure is vulnerable. The other says the Iranian state is still organized enough to respond. And if both of those messages are landing at once, then the region is entering a more dangerous informational and strategic phase of the war. So the real question tonight is not simply whether Bahrain's refinery was hit badly enough to disrupt normal operations, or whether Mojtaba Khamenei has enough legitimacy to secure long-term control. Those questions matter, but the deeper question is this. Has the conflict now reached a point where blows against infrastructure and rapid acts of political consolidation are replacing older assumptions about deterrence? Because if they are, then the next stage will not be defined only by battlefield maps or casualty counts, and that wartime disruption is no longer theoretical. Verification notes. The script above is grounded in the reporting and analysis you supplied, plus cross-checking on the leadership transition and regional energy disruption. Key facts used in the script include Mojtaba Khamenei was named Iran's new supreme leader after Ali Khamenei's death, and AP describes him as a 56-year-old hardline cleric with close ties to the Revolutionary Guard. AP reports that Brent crude surged to nearly $120 a barrel, and that Bahrain's only oil refinery was apparently hit, while Iran's attacks in the Strait of Hormuz had all but stopped tanker use of the key lane, through which about a fifth of the world's oil is carried. The Al Jazeera feature says attacks hit 4 major storage facilities and a distribution center in and around Tehran. That at least 1,255 people had been killed in the strikes since February 28th, that daily civilian fuel rations were cut from 30 liters to 20 liters, and that BAPCO declared force majeure after Iranian strikes targeted Bahrain energy installations. The same Al Jazeera report cites Iranian Red Crescent and health officials describing toxic hydrocarbons, sulfur, and nitrogen oxides in the smoke, plus acid rain and respiratory health concerns. RAND commentary cited by Al Jazeera notes that strategic bombing campaigns often fail to break a population's will and can instead produce a rally around the flag effect. Carnegie's analysis explains why hereditary-style succession is politically sensitive in Iran, since dynastic transfer cuts against the Islamic Republic's revolutionary identity.